There we go. All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our third webinar for this targeted grazing series. And my name is Morgan Doran. I'm a livestock and natural resources advisor with UC Cooperative Extension, and really fortunate to have tonight with us Nathan Medler. And Nathan is a livestock producer, targeted grazing practitioner in the Sierra Nevada foothills. And Nathan, I'll let you say more about yourself and what you do.
Okay, thank you. My wife and I run a target grazing business. She does work another job, so it's mainly full time for me. And we're located in Loomis currently, and we have four employees, shepherds, and then we have a couple other guys that help us part time transporting animals around. And we like to kind of stay close to home, but we will go over to Nevada sometimes and do some targeted grazing. And we also have been trying to produce replacements and some meat animals at the same time when it works out. And I think we started doing small projects 2011, and then I quit my job in 2014, but I had to do some side work on ranches, but it was all in ag. And now I don't get to do much else but run animals and raise a child.
Awesome. Thank you, Nathan. So you just get to do the fun stuff now.
Yeah.
Right on. All right. Well, tonight we are talking about small ruminant nutrition, and also a big part of that is just the rumen function, how the rumen works. So we'll cover quite a bit of information, and just jump into the first slide, just showing some of the topics that we will cover, and it's not advanced. There we go. Um, so some of the topics that we'll cover, nutrition topics, will be first the ruminant digestive system, its anatomy and how it functions. We'll also talk about the microbial community in the rumen. And it's really these two factors, how the anatomy and the microbial community in the rumen, that really will make ruminants unique and allow them to digest fiber, which is really important in consuming a lot of the forages in our landscape. So it makes so rumen, in my biased opinion, ruminants are pretty darn amazing animals in that they can do this. They can digest fiber and consume all of these forages in our landscape. We'll also cover some of the primary macronutrients for small ruminants, namely energy and protein, and what those sources are and how those are metabolized. Um, Annual forage quality and nutrient demand, and limitations that ruminants have, as well as body condition scoring and the application of that scoring technique, grazing behavior, copper toxicity, and also assessing the nutritional environment and how that plays into bidding jobs, targeted grazing jobs. One aspect about this topic of nutrition is that we want to kind of identify or point out times when targeted grazing is different than commercial production. And I know in the past two presentations, that's been kind of repeated several times because it can be very different than just regular commercial production. And so I'm going to lean heavily on Nathan's input for pointing out how some of these topics of nutrition are unique in targeted grazing situations. And the way that's going to kind of play out is we're going to have some slides like this, where we're soliciting Nathan's input on various nutrition topics. And so just to get his perspective. And we're going to start off with this first perspective from Nathan. And Nathan, if you can provide us some examples of why and how nutrition for livestock and targeted grazing can be different from commercial production operations.
So, starting with the commercial production, the main goal would be keeping animals in top health and weight gain, mainly for meat sales or possibly for wool. And so they will run on rangeland or maybe planted fields or irrigated fields. And when they see a loss in production, they will either move them to another permanent place that they have uh, to continue the weight gain. Where with targeted grazing, we're providing a service. So when we do that, there's a potential to lose production, and so we don't get to have top quality feed all year round, and so we have to kind of change and possibly add supplement to meet our nutritional demands. We do get a chance to do a targeted grazing and get top quality nutrition, possibly in orchards where it is irrigated, or vineyards where they might have planted uh, cover crop in between the rows and it's been irrigated, or we've had early rains. So we're definitely providing a service. So we're trying to match our timeline up with our customers.
But it's not always optimal for what
It's
you're forced to do as the targeted grazer is not always optimal for
Yeah, it's
production from
definitely
a
not
production
optimal
standpoint.
for our animals. We
Yeah.
definitely can take a production hit.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Thank you, Nathan. So jumping into the next topic is start looking at the ruminant digestive system and its anatomy. And so here you can see this picture superimposed on or over the animal. And the main point of this one is looking at the different compartments of the digestive system. And also the digestive system in a ruminant does occupy a pretty large volume of space in the animal. So this, not to scale, but it might not be that far off in terms of a two-dimensional scale. So the the compartments of the ruminant digestive stomach is the rumen, which is the just really large compartment right here, and it primarily functions as a large fermentation vat. The reticulum, which is attached to the rumen. There's actually a lot of movement of food in between the reticulums, a large opening between the two, between the reticulum and the rumen. Then there's the omasum, and then the abomasum right here. It leads into the small intestine, and it's the abomasum that is most like our stomach. It's some people call it a true stomach. It's acid digestion stomach, much like ours. So just to compare how these digestive systems, compare with other animals, other livestock, avian species and other monogastric livestock, such as pigs and dogs and cats. They have these monogastrics have a digestive system very similar to ours, with a simple stomach, small intestine, large intestine, and anus. Ruminants have a specialized system and they're called foregut fermenters because a lot of the feed is fermented in the front part of its digestive system. And then there are hindgut fermenters, such as horses and rabbits, that have large compartments on the back end of their digestive system. Probably if you've been around horses, they tend to have a lot of flatulence, especially when you give them a kick and they start to go. That's because they are hindgut fermenters. We have a little bit of hindgut fermentation depending on what we eat, but we don't have very much compared to horses. So just a slight comparison of these different digestive systems, with ruminants being the foregut fermenters and are releasing gas on the front end. So a little more detail on the digestive system. I'm going to go to this 3D model, which is going to take us to a website, just to give you an idea of how the stomach is arranged in the animal. Now, let's see. And don't let anyone ever tell you that a ruminant has four stomachs. If they do, they're lying or it's not true. A ruminant has one stomach with four different compartments, being the rumen, the reticulum, the omasum, and the abomasum. So this is kind of a cool website that gives you a three-dimensional view of the digestive system. So I'm going to spin it over here. So this would be the left side, on the left side of the animal. And this big compartment right here, that is all the rumen. And you can see these different grooves throughout the rumen. We'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. And then this big lobe on the front end. So this is towards the mouth. This is towards the rear. This is the reticulum. And like I said, there's a lot of movement in between of food particles between the rumen and the reticulum. There's the esophagus going where food is deposited into the rumen. And then there is the omasum right here. And then the abomasum, which is that true stomach, and then leads through the duodenum and then into the small intestine. So you can get a pretty good idea of how all this is situated. And this is the abomasum and the omasum would be on the right side of the animal, along with the liver. All right, so escape out of this. And there's another, let me see, I got to move some things around my screen. Another website. This is a website to show a video, YouTube video, that shows the anatomy. And I'm going to mute this because the sound, they got some cheesy music that plays along with this. And so I'll narrate as we go. But there are just certain points that it's a long video, 10-minute video. We're not going to watch the whole thing. I'm going to advance to certain parts of the video. It's pretty instructional. Normally what we like to do is have an actual digestive system available and dissect it, open it up, let people see it, smell it. But we can't do that online. So this is a ruminant digestive system, stomach, that is inflated with gas. They probably pumped like nitrogen gas or something into it to fill it up. There he's pointing out the rumen, the reticulum. This is from the left side of the animal. And there he's pointing out a groove, one groove right there. And there are multiple grooves around the rumen, which don't create compartments in the rumen, but they do create, well, kind of subcompartments, maybe. And we'll say a little bit more about that function of these grooves in a minute when we start looking inside. So I'm going to advance it to where we are then going to the left side. I'm sorry, the right side. So he's going to turn that whole thing around. And there you can see the esophagus, the pink thing in his right hand or left hand right now. So there's the other side of the rumen, the reticulum that he's pinching right there, the omasum, and the abomasum, which is that true stomach leading to the small intestine. All right, I'm going to advance it a bit more. And no, I have this written down 450, right about there. Okay. So there is a rumen, inside the lining of the rumen. He's pointing out the inside of the one of those grooves, which on the inside is called a pillar. And it's basically muscle tissue that when it contracts, it basically moves digesta, food, and liquid around in the rumen. So it's mixing and moving. There's another pillar that they're pointing to. And then you also notice the lining of the rumen. You see all these finger-like tissues, and those are rumen papillae. The purpose of the papillae is to increase surface area and absorb nutrients from the rumen into the bloodstream and transporting it primarily to the liver. And so you can see the pretty long papillae right there. And then you can see shorter papillae in another part of the rumen. And the difference is that the long papillae are um, in the lower part of the rumen, where there's a lot of nutrients, a lot of liquid, more need for absorption, and the shorter papillae are in the upper part, where there's just primarily gas. All right, I'm going to advance to, let's see, 725, right about there. So now we're going to look at the inside of the reticulum, which looks quite a bit different than the lining of the rumen. You can see all these honeycomb tissues in the lining of the reticulum, and Danny's going to point out where it transitions from the reticulum to the rumen, because you see the honeycomb then changes into the papillae, and there's a little tube right there that is an esophagus. So the purpose of the honeycomb lining is to capture smaller feed particles and move those particles to an orifice in the reticulum, and then allows them to move further downstream into the omasum. And there he's going to have an omasum. And the omasum, it's a pretty dense compartment of the stomach. Very solid, very dense, and it has all of these tissue folds in it that are kind of muscular and also absorb a lot of moisture. That's the main purpose of the omasum, is to remove moisture from all this digesta, the stuff that's moving out of the reticulum, and leave the feed particles. And so all these folds increase surface area and moisture absorption. I'm going to advance just a bit more. And now the abomasum, which is the compartment of the stomach that is very much like our own. And inside the abomasum is where acid secretion occurs for digesting the food particles that are moving downstream from the reticulum through the omasum and into the abomasum. And the acid then breaks down those food particles further for further absorption in the small intestine. All right, so I'm going to stop this video right there, and let's see. Okay, back to the PowerPoint slides. So inside of the rumen, there's a whole lot happening. This is just another web link. We'll just spend a couple of seconds on this. Pretty interesting, though. There's a whole lot of life happening inside inside the rumen fluid. So this is fluid, rumen fluid that's in a slide. The black particles you see are feed particles, and all of these little things, bugs moving around, those are protozoans. So inside the rumen are protozoans, as well as a lot of bacteria, as well as fungi that all have a function, a role in degrading the food that is eaten by the ruminant. All right. So there is a lot happening in the rumen. It's a highly evolved digestive system and very complex system. Let me see if I can. This recording, you hear birds, you hear the wind blowing. Anyway, from the outside, it doesn't look like much is happening. On the inside, a lot is happening. There's a lot of motility, meaning a lot of these muscular contractions and movement and mixing. of the food in the rumen through the reticulum, and then a lot of movement through the digestive system, all based on muscle contractions. The cow right there is ruminating, so she's bringing up a cud of coarse feed. There's a wad of coarse feed. She's chewing it. She's breaking it down, increasing surface area so that the microbes can attach to the more surfaces and break those down. Also, what's happening is they're eructating um, gases that are evolved through the fermentation process. So the rumination, it's a good thing when they're doing that. It means they're content, they're happy, they're full. Um, Another thing that's happening is that there's a regulation in this complex system of a rate of passage of feed particles. It's all regulated partly by the amount of feed, the quality of feed that they're consuming, as well as some other factors. There's changing microbial populations that depending on the feed, the type of feed, and there's also a lot happening with the saliva that can buffer the pH in the rumen because a lot of the digestion creates a more acidic environment, so the saliva buffers that. Also has a role in cycling nitrogen in the ruminant system. It comes in handy when the animal is in a low nitrogen or low protein diet situation. Let me see here. So, just a few slides on some changes that happen to the animal, the ruminant system. And one significant change that can happen is the populations of bacteria inside the rumen. So we have three pies right here. The pie A is a diet with 45% forage and then 55% concentrates, so being grains. So it's a pretty high grain diet, but there's still a fair amount of forage in it, 45%. And you can see that this blue, it's hard to see the colors of the bacteria. It's not important what they are, but you can see this one group that's represented by blue. It's pretty large. Red is about a quarter, 25%. But if you increase the amount of grain or concentrates and reduce the amount of forage, the population changes significantly. This population represented by red and also by orange increase dramatically, and the blue decreases. This pi C is a population of bacteria from a rumen that is in subacute ruminal acidosis. So it's very high grain diet. It's unhealthy for the animal, and it's producing basically too much acid, which creates an unhealthy environment for the animal. So the main point with this is that the microbial population changes as the diet changes. So this is constantly shifting based on the diet. It takes time for those populations to shift. So that has some implications when you're switching from one diet to another. And I am going to then rely on Nathan. You can chime in here and tell us about how you treat these types of situations when you're transitioning from one feed of one quality to another.
Yeah, so one time of the year that comes to mind is when we breed and then they're about to lamb out or kid out the goats, we start feeding alfalfa. That will be in August, late August, early September. And with the weather kind of changing and not raining as early, we can't get onto our alfalfa stubble or our grass hay stubble on time. So we will start feeding the animals while they're on dry pasture. We'll start feeding them some supplement like dry alfalfa or baled alfalfa in almond holes, for example, or some type of other commodity that we can get our hands on. And when we're going to make that shift, we need to give them a week or two and build up that feed that we're feeding them. And then when we ship them full so that when they get on to the new pasture, they don't gorge And when we pick the pasture that we're going to put them on, we may try to find something like the alfalfa to be more mature because it's going to be less likely to bloat, or some alfalfa that has a lot of grass growing in it or weeds, so that we can make that transition from there, from dry feed to that field, and then from that field they're going to go on to some stronger new growth alfalfa. So
Excellent.
mainly keeping them full before you transport and just introducing them slowly. Like, don't give them 4 pounds of alfalfa, the day before you want to ship, if you didn't transition them earlier.
Right. And have you ever encountered situations where you've had some maybe illnesses or death from too fast of transitions,
Yes,
too severe?
feeding, uh, having rain come, pulling supplement because or not supplement, but mineral, and then feeding corn and having the goats turn into pigs and have a couple bloat on whole corn, the ones that are more eager to get in there and
Yeah.
get that feed. So it was a combination of things.
So you have to be really careful when you're transitioning from one feed to another to do it gradually, as Nathan was pointing out, and to allow the ruminal microbial populations to shift in populations to that new feed. Um, and I haven't looked through all of these questions. I just noticed the last one from Martin about the spring green overloads. Is that why spring green overloads the bovine gut? Um, I think that you are referring to just the gut just getting full with a lot of green. Sometimes people call it washy feed. Is that what you're referring to, Martin? Okay. Yeah, and I know Nathan could probably say something about this. I'll just mention that a lot of green feed that we might have in January, February, sometimes into early March, it's so full of water that it fills the gut with water, and that it prevents the animal from getting a lot of nutrients into their rumen because it's too full of water. So it's kind of a way of a mechanism that limits their intake of nutrients because there's too much water in the gut. So there's not enough fiber, not enough other nutrients. Um, and we'll just do one more question. Sorry, Nathan. There's a question. Does anyone here use biochar, baking soda, or other supplements to help with feed transitions?
We have used baking soda before, and mainly when we're eating brush with the tannins. And we've tried it out on the alfalfa and stuff. I haven't had good luck with it, but people just leave it out for them to pick and choose. And I've been told by my vet that we should probably not leave it out if we want them to consume their mineral. So it just
Good.
depends on the situation. I haven't seen a huge change in animal health from leaving baking soda out.
Okay. Good. Thank you for that. We'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. So temperature changes can affect the way the ruminant system operates. And so in this example, we have cold stress shown by these blue boxes, and then heat stress shown by these kind of yellow, orangish boxes. So what happens in a cold stress situation is that the body is basically demanding more nutrients from the digestive system. So the food assimilation increases, which forces digestibility to increase, which also increases the reticular rumen, so the motility of the reticular rumen. So basically, the movement and mixing and the passage of feed through the reticular rumen increases. And what that does is it sends biochemical signals to the brain to, hey, you got to increase appetite. That means you have to increase your feed intake. So that's what cold stress will do to the animal. All these, it starts with the digestive system, the body demanding nutrients, and then that eventually sends signals to the brain. Heat stress is the opposite. The body doesn't need as many nutrients, not demanding as many nutrients, which creates kind of a backlog of acid in the stomach, and also ammonia nitrogen in the stomach in the rumen, which then decreases the reticular rumen motility. It decreases digestibility because the microbial population is now changing due to this changed environment. And that's sending signals to the brain to lower appetite and also reduce feed intake. So Nathan, back to you. Observations that you have noticed on the effects of temperature on ruminants.
So when it's cold out and it's going to rain, we try to give the animals fresh feed and fill their bellies before the rainstorms. And it's really hard when we get waves of week long rain or storms, rolling back to back. But our goal is to just keep as much feed in front of them so they can consume, and we will move them faster, partially because they will muck it up because it's raining. But if you can keep them full, their rumen will create heat, which will keep the animal alive, even if it's burning its reserved fats. And then the when it's really hot out, when we get weeks of, let's say, 100 plus, or a week worth of 100 plus degree weather, the animals will slow down their consumption rate. So you might be eating 3 acres a day. We'll get a heat wave with a group, and then they'll go down to 1 acre while it's really hot, especially if it doesn't cool off at night. If we're still in the high 80s or something in the evening, and so the rumen slows down, and so the animals slow down their intake when it's hot.
So that can really affect the amount of acreage that you can cover maybe from what you anticipated on a job, right?
Oh yes. So we're always looking at the weather. I mean, we're looking at a 10-day forecast and we're looking at a 30-day, but the 30-day just gives you a ballpark. And we're calling customers saying, hey, we're going to be on time, we're going to be late, we're ahead of schedule.
Right. Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you for that, Nathan. All right. Let's move on to the macronutrients, and we'll start with energy sources. And the primary energy sources are carbohydrates for the animal. Fats are also an energy source, although they're not a carbohydrate. So some of the feeds that do provide energy, primary feeds for energy, get hay or roughage, often called roughage in food production systems, animal production systems, and the type of carbohydrate is fiber, which is also cellulose. And so some of you may be familiar with cellulose, but some of you may not. Many of us think of carbohydrates as starches and sugars, but fiber is also a form of carbohydrate. And I'll just show you this diagram of a cellulose structure. And it's basically composed of these rings, which are sugar rings. This is cellulose is made of glucose rings. So these are all carbon rings. They're very energy dense, and in a cellulose molecule, you have these sugar rings that are connected together into a chain, and they're connected by these very strong hydrogen bonds. And then you have multiple chains that are connected together also through these bonds, and that you get many of them, and then many of them together, many of these chains attached to one another. It creates fiber or cellulose. And so we as humans, we cannot digest fiber because our bodies do not synthesize the enzyme that breaks these bonds between the chains and also between the glucose molecules. Um, so we just when we ingest fiber, we usually poop most of it out. It does do some good to our digestive tract. Ruminants also do not synthesize the enzyme to cleave to break these bonds. Um, However, they do have microbes in their rumen that do that. They synthesize cellulase to break these bonds within cellulose, and then that releases all of these glucose rings to be digested. So that's why fiber is a carbohydrate that is available can be available to ruminants for energy. Fresh forage is another source of energy, and in terms of fiber and also sugars in the form of fiber and sugars, grains in the form of starch, molasses in the form of sugar. We primarily would see that in a kind of a mixed feed, as well as fat, which is a non-carbohydrate form of energy. And that would also be something you would typically see in a mixed feed that you might buy from a feed mill or in a bag. So fiber does help maintain the rumen health of the animal. It's really important for the ruminant to have fiber. And I remember some ruminant nutritionists would say that fiber in the rumen is has like a function like when we floss our teeth, we're maintaining the health of our gums by flossing our teeth. Well, fiber has a similar function on the papillae, the lining of the rumen, keeping it healthy, keeping it clean. So fiber is very important in the maintaining the health of the rumen. Um, All right. Another macronutrient is protein, and the common sources for protein are alfalfa hay. It has about 20% protein. Soybean meal, much higher at 47%. Fresh forage often depends on what kind of forage it is and the time of year, but it can vary from 12 to 18%. Dry forage, so forage that we'd see in our rangelands in the summertime, can be about 4 to 6%, sometimes lower, sometimes a bit higher, but generally it's pretty low for the most part. Depends also on how early and late in the summer or early fall you are. Grains will have about 9 to 12% protein, and it's important to realize, you may have noticed this if you're buying any feed, that protein-rich feed is often the most expensive type of feed that you can buy. And the higher the protein in the feed, generally, the higher quality the feed is. So how do ruminants process nutrients? Well, microbes do most of the work. So when we start with, focus on carbohydrates, talking about the starches, the sugars, and the fiber, the microbes are doing a lot of the initial digestion for the ruminant. So they are breaking the bonds in the fiber particles, releasing those glucose molecules, which they can quickly, which is sugar, simple sugar. And so then they quickly ferment the sugar and the starch into volatile fatty acids. So that's why digestion creates a more acidic environment in the rumen, because a byproduct of the fermentation is a volatile fatty acid, which are then used some by the microbes along with nitrogen, ammonia nitrogen, to create more microbes for them to reproduce themselves. Also, a lot of these volatile fatty acids are absorbed through the papillae in the rumen into the bloodstream and then transported to the liver, where the liver can convert these volatile fatty acids into glucose. This is another amazing aspect about ruminants is this is kind of a key part, is that these volatile fatty acids evolved from the microbes, converted by the liver into glucose, which is basically like a common currency of energy at the cellular level in the animal. So it makes that glucose, converts it to glucose, and then it can be transported throughout the body for energy, so cellular processes. All right, now let's look at what happens to protein. So when protein enters the digestive system, some of it, if the particles are small enough or the proteins are protected, they will pass without being digested quickly to the abomasum, where they become protein they're digested and become a protein source for the animal. A lot of the protein will be degraded by microbes into ammonia nitrogen that can be absorbed to the liver, where from the liver is converted to urea, and that can be utilized in the blood and cycled, like I said before, in the saliva. Urea be in the saliva becomes a nitrogen source in low nitrogen environments for the rumen. But a lot of the ammonia is used by the microbes for their own growth, reproduction. And those microbes continue to digest feed, but a lot of them also pass downstream through the omasum and into the abomasum, where they are digested and become a protein source for the animal. So pretty amazing the way that works is the microbes, they're digesting feed, but they're also a feed source, a protein source for the ruminant. So when you're thinking about feeding the animal, you got to keep in mind that you're primarily feeding the microbes. And so if you maintain a happy microbial environment in the rumen, you maintain a happy rumen and you maintain happy animals. So it's often in feeding the ruminant, you're trying to balance the amount of carbohydrates, trying to get the right type of carbohydrates, and to balance that with the right amount of protein in the diet as well. Because you can end up with some situations where you might have a lot of carbohydrate, but maybe it's the wrong type. Maybe a lot of coarse roughage that's hard to digest. It doesn't have sufficient protein, and that's going to slow down the degradation of all of that cellulose because the microbes aren't happy. So you got to keep those microbes happy. Okay, transition now to some of the limitations that our ruminants may have. And I know Dan mentioned this bit about the mouth size in his presentation. Cows have a much larger mouth size than sheep, which have a larger mouth size than goats. And what that essentially means is that cows are taking much larger bites than sheep, and sheep take larger bites than goats. And the significance of that is that it determines how selective they can be in choosing their diet. Goats having a very small mouth can be very selective, much more selective than sheep, and sheep have a smaller mouth than a cow and can be more selective than a cow. So goats can select a much higher quality diet. And you guys may have noticed this. I know Nathan said that he notices that his goats will give him a mix of feed. They'll go and pick out the corn kernels in that feed. Yeah. Anything else you want to add to that, Nathan?
Well, yeah, going back a little bit, when you're changing feed, and so maybe the animal didn't bloat necessarily on the corn, but it changed the rumen content and pretty much gave it acidosis. So that's something you have to watch out. And the goats are tricky because they can be very, very selective with their mouth. And so when you're feeding any type of grain, you can change the rumen and the microbes in there and kill part of them, or overload it, grain overload. And so with the sheep and the goats, I think it's a little more important than the cows to change that diet slowly and make sure that they're eating what you want and not what they want to keep them healthy.
Perfect. Yeah, so it can be tricky with goats and the selectivity that they have and trying to prevent some of those consequences.
Yes, I
Um,
think, I mean, Morgan, like taking whole corn, maybe with goats, you might use rolled corn instead or cracked
yeah,
corn and make it a little harder for them to pick it out.
right. Okay, good point. Everyone understand what the difference is? Rolled corn, cracked corn, like steam flake corn. So it's cooked, flattened, it's kind of like rolled oats as opposed to whole oats. Um, Moving on to another limitation that ruminants have is their tolerance of tannins. And so goats, as many people know, they have a much higher tolerance of tannins than sheep. And sheep are pretty much equal to cattle in their tolerance of tannins, which is generally pretty low. And tannins are, these complex molecules, secondary compounds that are produced by plants. And you can see these different types of tannins down here in this picture. Gallotannins, elagitannins, and then the more complex tannins and condensed tannins. And we hear often tannins like in wines, and that give wine some astringency or these complex flavors. So that's one effect of tannins. In the ruminant world, tannins, and also in the plant world, tannins are anti-herbivory compounds. So the plant produces them at a cost to try to reduce the chance of animals consuming that plant. Um, and what they do is when a ruminant eats them is they bind dietary proteins. So proteins that the animal is ingesting in their diet, the tannins can bind those proteins. So at low levels, tannins can have some benefits for the animals and for us as well. But at high levels, what high tannin levels, what it does is it reduces the digestibility of the protein because the tannins are binding those proteins and making them indigestible. So it's reducing digestibility. Now, goats have this ability to tolerate tannins and consume tannin-rich feeds because they have these salivary proteins that will bind the tannins before the tannins can bind the dietary proteins. So that's something unique about goats. That's why they have this high tolerance of tannins and can eat these often brush species that cattle and sheep may nibble on, may consume a little bit of, but they cannot eat a lot. So that has a lot to do with the choice of animals that you are using for different jobs, depending on whether it's mostly grasses and forbs or a combination of grasses and forbs and brush or almost all brush. You're going to choose your animals according to what the nutritional environment is. One more limitation of ruminants is kind of anatomical limitation, and that's this reticulomasal orifice. So it's the hole that leads that food must pass through between the reticulum and the omasum. And in a cow, that hole is about maybe the size of a nickel. And I don't know exactly what the size is in a sheep or a goat, but I imagine it's much smaller and maybe about the size of a dime. The point is that it's a pretty small orifice that all of their food must pass through. All the food that's moving downstream must pass through. So that those particles, feed particles, they have to get pretty darn small in order to move further down the GI tract. And so what that does is it regulates the rate of passage of food out of the rumen into the omasum. It also regulates the amount of feed that the animal can consume. Because if the rate of passage is slow, it fills the rumen is full, it sends a signal to the brain, I got to eat less food. So the implications of this, if your animals are on a low quality feed diet with low protein, maybe like in the summertime, eating dry feed, low protein value, they fill their gut up. There aren't there is not enough protein to keep the microbial population revved up and reproducing and digesting a lot of that cellulose. So their gut becomes a little bit impacted. So the animal has to wait for the microbes to do their job to break down all that cellulose in order to move it downstream, make room for more feed, tell the animal, okay, we're ready for more. And the opposite is with a high quality feed with a lot of protein. You have those microbes all revved up, reproducing quickly, doing their job. Things are digesting quickly. Particle sizes are reduced quickly, moving downstream. So those are some of the limitations that ruminants have that have some implications in targeted grazing situations and also just nutrition in general for ruminants. So Nathan, tell us about any differences that you observe in grazing behavior on poor versus higher quality forages or feeds, and maybe some adjustments that you make to compensate for that.
So there is a difference when we have poor quality feed versus high quality feed available. And when we drop animals off, I love to watch the goats and sheep walk around, and they will sniff and smell stuff and bite forage and move on. And if they like something uh, more, then they will seek that out. And so when we start a project or a paddock, the first couple days on the project, we're trying to size the paddock for what quality of forage or the amount of forage that's in there. So for example, if it's poor quality and they're not going to eat a whole lot of it, we will make the paddock a lot smaller so that we still get the animal impact of trampling. And if it's a bunch of great feed, then we can make the paddock a larger size and let them pick through it. If you make it too big, they're going to eat the good feed first and then the bad, and then they may not eat the ugly feed that nobody wants to eat. So we're trying to create a competition for the animals and not leave them in a paddock too long, more than, let's say, 3 days. My goal is to do 24-hour moves so that they are consuming all of it at once and then reset eating it all at once, instead of eating the good one day, the bad the other day, and the ugly the third day, and possibly losing condition slowly over a month or 2 weeks, doing a 3-day set instead of a 24-hour set.
Because they're spending most of their time eating the bad stuff and the ugly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Nathan, can you maybe think of some situations when you might want to feed them, supplement them some roughage, some fibrous feed?
We feed, so when we're on alfalfa stubble, we will feed roughage, possibly almond hulls or like a low quality grass or oat hay to keep their rumen in balance. And we've tried the same thing when we're eating brush that has high tannins, and to keep them from eating trees instead,
And
because
some of
they'll
the,
strip the bark right off of some of the trees.
because they are in need of some more roughage and they are trying to get that roughage from the bark.
I think we're still learning on that one,
Hmm.
because it could be the sap in the trees also,
Yeah.
but it's
Okay.
not the first or second day that they start on the trees. It's usually a little further down, so they're missing something. And we
Yeah.
played around with it for a couple years on a certain project that we're working on.
Okay. I think and Dan has mentioned the project of Blodgett. Is that the project you're
Yep.
referring to? Okay.
Yes, and right now we're running a different project up there, or we have been for the last couple years, and we're still on. We have this year to complete it. We're
Hmm.
running a group of sheep and in a separate group of goats, and the sheep are being introduced to a lot of tannins up in that country.
Hmm. Okay. So so in that situation, it's they're after the sap or they're after some more roughage in their diet, and so that's the situation in which there's there's a lot of the leaves, the brush leaves have high protein, also high tannin. So they're getting a lot of protein, but the gut is in out of balance. So you don't have a really happy rumen environment because the microbes aren't very happy. There's too much protein and not enough carbohydrate or roughage in their diet. So they're trying to find balance some way in that diet. Good, thank you, Nathan. All right, so let's take a look at the crude protein value in our common rangeland forages throughout the year. So on the y-axis, we have crude protein value, and that's just crude protein is just a common way of measuring, common analysis that's done in measuring protein. And then over on the x-axis, we have the months, so January being 1 and December being month 12. And so you can see that in January, the protein levels are going up and peak about in March. And then they take a pretty steady decline into the summer where they reach about 4.5%. And this is just on average for California annual rangelands. And then in the fall, after we get some rains, plants germinate, the crude protein values start to go up as the plants begin to grow. So add on top of that the nutritional requirements of ewes. And once again, this is kind of average. And this is assuming that breeding is happening in June, lambing is happening in November timeframe, so fall lambing. And you can see that right about this time of March, the lamb is probably weaned, the animal is open, and then they get bred. So pretty low protein requirements relative to other times of the year, right about 8.5, 8 point or 9%. And then after breeding, takes a while for the fetus to grow, and then as soon as the fetus starts growing rapidly, the protein requirements go up quite a bit for the ewe and peak right about lambing. And so you can see that there are points along these curves where there's a surplus of protein and there's a deficit of protein. This difference about I think what's that about a 7.5% deficit in this at this point right here. Um, and so there are things that you can do to fill the gap. You can find a different forage source, higher quality, maybe irrigated pasture. You can buy supplemental feed, alfalfa or anything else that costs a lot of money. Most likely would go broke trying to fill that large of a gap. But there might be some you can adjust your lambing cycle, time of breeding, time of lambing, another adjustment you can do to better match the forage availability, quality, I should say. So, and if you don't fill this gap, it's going to have an effect on the animal. And that would be a consequence. They're going to start to um, use their muscle, their fat, their muscle reserves. And so that will have an effect on the condition of the animal, which kind of leads to this next slide, is a body condition scoring system. This is pretty common throughout the sheep industry, is this scoring system, which is a score of 1 to 5, with 1 being emaciated, 5 being obese. So it's not often that you see one at the 1 level, and you don't see use at the 5 level either. But basically, this is an evaluation that you do by feeling around the vertebrae between the last rib and it's in the loin area between the last rib and the hip bones, and you're feeling for the protrusion of the vertebrae bones, the spinous process on the top, and this transverse process on the side, and also feeling how much tissue they have, fat, muscle, in that loin region. So I'm not going to go through all these descriptions, but there are good descriptions here, and there is a good publication from Oregon State University on body condition scoring of sheep. And I've also come across livestock producers that kind of develop their own scoring system, but this is a pretty standard one across the sheep industry. So I'm going to rely on Nathan once again. Can you tell us about how you monitor body condition in your animals? What are the targets, the body condition targets at different times of the year and production cycle? And also, what is your strategy for adjusting body condition and how do you handle the high and low scoring animals and why do you handle them in that way?
So yeah, we don't keep records on specific animals for body condition, but what we do is anytime we have a corral day or we're transporting, we will sift out or sort out the thin animals that are maybe in the two range, where it might be the lower two, and we will first ask why that animal's losing condition. So we'll do a Flamacha score on it. We'll check its teeth, see if it's missing teeth, if it's old, if it missed the coal, or ask the question: was it sick and has it recovered, or does it have a disease that's keeping it from maintaining condition? And so we will sort those off and take them off of a job unless we think they can recover.
And Nathan, you mentioned a FAMACHA score, which is looking at the eyelids, seeing the color of the eyelids, and which would be if it's more of a white color, be a signs of anemia.
Yeah, so we will deworm, spot deworm animals throughout the season, and we'll do that on the animals we think will recover. And we'll deworm them regardless if they have a low Flamacha score, but they get pulled from the
Mhm.
job most likely.
Okay.
And our goal is to have, the average would be a number three body condition. But as we go through the dry season, they will drop in to twos, and then we're trying to get them back up to threes for breeding, and then through kidding season or lambing season, their body condition will drop depending on uh, how many kids that or lambs they're nursing, how much milk they're producing. So that's another thing you have to look at, is why is that animal looking thin? Uh, a ewe that's feeding twins is going to need a higher nutrition or protein than one raising a single. So we never see fours. I shouldn't say never. We will see fours if a ewe will lose her lamb, or she aborted or something like that, or missed a breeding. Then you can pick them out, especially this time of year. They're just obese. So we try to keep them in the range of twos and threes, uh, and we don't want to keep them in twos for too long. But it does happen with targeted grazing and or targeted grazing with the production cycle mixed into it.
Mhm. And I remember you at one point you were telling me about the other producer, someone you knew who was um, I think
Oh,
culling all the twos and keeping all of the fours. Can you say more about that?
yeah, they had some sheep, and they weren't thinking about it properly. They were a young producer, and they kept calling the skinny ewes. But the skinny ewes were raising the lambs, and they were keeping all their coal ewes that had aborted, but they looked good. They were nice and fat, but they kind of ran themselves almost right out of business because all their production was gone. They couldn't replace any of their animals.
So that's a good point that has some ties to record keeping, just to understand what your animals are doing, and just maybe just a bit of a prelude for one of Julie's presentations that she'll do later down the road on record keeping and some technologies to help that. Um, Good, Nathan. And there was one more question do you use the same scoring system in sheep and goats?
Uh, yes, on a little, they're a little different. The goats seem to gain their fat internally first, and
Mhm.
they don't put the fat on the outside like you would see at the fairgrounds. You know, a show goat where they're
Mhm.
just waddly fat. Um, the goats are are built way different than the sheep, so you have to keep that in mind when you're looking at animals
So you
between
kind of
species.
you adjust depending on the species, your
Yes.
scoring system. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Nathan. All right. Next slide. All right. So now we're going to cover just a bit of grazing behavior, and Nathan touched on this as well. So a question to ask yourselves: do livestock behave like us when it comes to eating? So I'm going to put you guys in this imaginary situation here, this next slide. So imagine you may not dress this way, but just imagine, use your imagination. It's Friday afternoon, maybe about 4 o'clock, been a long work week. You're invited to this social gathering and you haven't eaten since lunchtime. You're getting kind of hungry and you've maybe had a drink or two. And instead of all that food being right there in front of you that you could eat, you're in this big crowd. Oh, the food's gone. Oh, but there is this little tray of vegetables and with a little bit of ranch dressing, it looks like. So think about how you would respond, how would you would behave in an environment like this, where there's a lot of people, everyone's probably hungry. It's been a long time since you've eaten. There's a little tray of food. Are you going to eat that vegetables or as much as you can, as quickly as you can before all these other people who are also probably pretty hungry, uh, before they eat it? So imagine yourself in that situation compared to the situation maybe at a lunch buffet where you have a couple of hours, maybe 2, 3 hours to sit down, enjoy a leisurely meal, and whoops, there we go. You might start off with some hors d'oeuvres, some cheeses and salamis, and then move on to the meats, side dishes, and then on to the desserts. You might take your time. You might pick and choose. Some people might go to the desserts first. You don't have to uh, give yourself up. Every time I give this presentation, there's always someone who says, "Yeah, I'm going to go to the desserts, and I'm going to go to the desserts again." And then maybe to the meats and the sides. But the point is that you can take your time. You can pick and choose. You can be highly selective in this type of environment because there's always going to be a lot more food there. So let's compare that to the way animals eat. They experience their environment in very much the same way, and that they have eating experience, they have grazing experience. They know what's good. It's like Nathan was talking about. They know what the good is, they know what the bad is, and they know what the ugly is. And they are going to behave in their environment based on their eating experience, the competition that they have, and the amount of hunger that they have. And that gives us the opportunity to manipulate their grazing behavior based on these factors: their experience, the competition, and the hunger. So competition we can manipulate by increasing the density that they are in or decreasing the density, withholding feed for a certain amount of time or giving them lots of feed. And also just giving animals broad grazing experiences so they know what is good, what's bad, and what is not, what's ugly. So Nathan, let's just start with the first two questions on this one. So how do you manipulate grazing behavior on your targeted grazing jobs, and in what situations do you use high grazing or low grazing density?
So we just adjust the paddocks mainly for We want 24-hour sets, give or take.
Hmm.
But it's not a timing issue. I try to explain to the guys it's not about timing. It's when they need to be moved is when you move them. But we're trying to hit that 24-hour mark and not go too much over. So it just depends on if we have good feed and they can get it done in 24 hours without trampling too much of it. If it's low quality feed, then we're going to trample most of it and let them just try to get maybe the good and part of the bad out of it. And so our our stock numbers don't change a whole lot, so we need to change the size of the paddock so that we can get our density correct.
Okay. Do you, I know some grazers that they will like go into a vineyard and maybe they have time to be there for a few months. So like January, February, March, and they will put animals out on a very large area because like in January, just to do some light grazing in that whole area. And then when it comes time for them to perhaps get out of the vineyard, then they start pinching them down and grazing more intensively, more higher density. Do you ever do situations like that?
So I think it comes down to the client and what their goals are.
Hmm.
You know, there is situations where we can high graze and we're trying to put weight on lambs. And if it doesn't hurt anything, then we will high graze and leave maybe a third or half of the feed there and move on. And if we have time on the bigger vineyards, we may go back if it's been 45 days or longer and the grass is regrowing. And there are
Okay.
situations where we do a two pass system on purpose.
Hmm. For that very purpose of the first pass, just maybe high grading it to get some good gains, also reduce the amount of vegetation, and then coming back to reduce maybe fuel loads.
Yeah, and the second pass, if you do it the timing right, the second pass will actually, or the first pass will improve the feed quality on the second pass.
Right, right. Good point. Okay. All right. So let's move on to the other questions and points. So at about looking at toxic plants. Now Rosie's going to cover toxic plants later, so we're not going to really cover toxic plants. But in high density grazing situations where there are toxic plants, how do you handle that? And maybe there's a professor, retired professor now, Dr. Fred Provenza from Utah State University. He often talked about in ruminant nutrition, say variety is a spice of life. Maybe if you can have any comments on that about those two.
So the with toxic plants, it really depends on how toxic the plant is. If
Hmm.
it's a plant like azalea that can kill a goat with not very much leaves, then we're probably going to fence it out. If it's something that's a little less, they have to eat a lot. I saw a comment about elderberry. We'll just give them a bigger area or make sure that there is enough other vegetation. You may get one or two goats or sheep that decide that that was what they wanted to eat and they get a bellyache and you have to treat them with charcoal.
Hmm.
But yeah, we try to avoid the toxic plants if we know that uh, it could cause them to die. So
Yeah, and it's something should have mentioned earlier is that when you are in a high density situation, it's like that little tray of veggies. It's going to be it's going to be consumed pretty uniformly and pretty quickly. Because there's no selectivity, or very little selectivity. So same in these environments as if you have a very high density, highly competitive environment, it's getting grazed pretty evenly, pretty uniformly, which can create these problematic times when there are toxic plants. So you have to be, yeah, kind of
yeah,
cognizant of
so
what's out there.
we try not to let them get hungry too when they're eating a paddock like that has toxic plants. We're not trying to force the animal to eat that. If
Hmm.
they leave it, it would be better for everyone. And
Right.
they can adjust on some of that stuff, but not on everything.
Right. Yep. And how about this concept of variety as a spice of life?
I the animals love variety. So like when we go onto something, let's say alfalfa or grass hay, where it's just uniform feed, and we're able to fence in a canal or a ditch that the farmer's using, and it's just full of weeds. They will go in and pick all the weeds or grasses or forbs and some alfalfa, but they would rather have a variety than just straight uh, alfalfa that's on the field if we can
Mhm.
avoid it.
So given the opportunity and these different types of feeds, they will pick and choose what they need based on what their body is telling them.
A lot of times, yeah, that's what they will do, especially the goats because they are browsers. They will bite and run and bite and run, and it's pretty amazing to see them when you first let them into a section because it is like a full on uh, competition. It's kind of like the TV show where people have to go shopping, but they only have like 3 minutes to do it, and they're just swiping shelves. That's what the animals are doing.
Right, right. Test it first. All right, well, good. Thank you, Nathan. We're getting close to the end here. Do want to mention something about copper toxicity, because there are occasions in targeted grazing situations where you can find some high copper levels, and sheep are pretty susceptible to copper, very much more so than cattle and goats. Feeds that are upwards of 25 parts per million are potentially toxic to sheep. Um, and in a lot of orchards and excuse me, and vineyards, there are times there might be some historical copper fungicide uses or applications that could present some problems. So it's really good to be cognizant of this. I remember about 20 years ago, one grazer is grazing a vineyard that was used to be an orchard, a prune orchard, and lost one sheep one day, didn't know why, lost another one another day, then lost another one. And the animals never did make it to the diagnostic lab, but we did start to take some forage samples from the vineyard and found that the low levels of copper were at about 19 parts per million and the highs were about 50 plus parts per million. So we suspect that copper was the issue in that situation. So Nathan, are you concerned when grazing orchards or vineyards about copper toxicity? If so, what do you do to mitigate that exposure?
It hasn't been a huge concern, but we like to have the conversation with whoever's managing the property to see if they've sprayed it. And if we are concerned, we always I like to actually take samples of the feed and send them into, like we've used Dairy One before, because it will
Mhm.
give me more information than just if there's copper. It'll tell me how much protein and how much water is in the feed, because we can get into a point where the feed has plenty of protein, but they can't eat enough of it because it's so waterlogged. So
Right.
testing, maybe not every place, but if you have the chance, it's kind of fun to go do and see what the grass has to offer or the plants.
And can you say more about Dairy One, submitting samples to Dairy One?
I don't. Dairy One is they're a lab that cooks the grass down for you and figures out what's in it.
They
I
do
don't
the,
I don't deal with them directly. Dan
yeah,
has helped me on that.
yeah. And I know some livestock advisors around the state, they have like a list of labs that they would have. So if you guys have uh, desire to send samples into a lab, work with your advisor on collecting the samples and getting those submitted. It can tell you a lot. Okay, so Nathan, you have I think a pretty good experience, or maybe not a good experience, a bad experience that would be good to share
Yeah,
on the
so
use of ionophores, and maybe you can say what excuse me, ionophores are.
right. So we were having mineral mixed for us, salt or it's mixed with salt, but it has all the minerals that we would want. And it was custom feed being done, and we would get like Bobatech in or Rumensin. I think the last time we had Bobatech, and then added to it, and that was to keep the babies from getting coccidia. And so we were having animals have like seizures and then passing away. So we sent our mineral in to get tested, and there was rumensin in there. Uh, Not necessarily high levels, but it wasn't supposed to be in there at all. It wasn't on the label. And so I stopped using that mineral, and we had another batch made with decox for the same reason. It's just the decox was way more expensive than the Bovatech, but we were trying to figure out that situation. And we had that mineral tested, and it had rumensin in it also. And I still have 3.5 tons of that stuff sitting out back that I don't even know what to do with because it will probably kill the animals. So now we have it mixed out of Utah where they make it for equine. And so none of the ionophores are allowed to be at that facility. So it never went through the mill. So if we want to add it separately, we can. But I'm not relying on a mill to mix it for me.
Right, right. And that's a good lesson. And you're not the only one who was affected by that batch or other producers. So it's good to be cognizant. And when you do start recognizing some problems, like what Nathan experienced, contact a vet and try to get that figured out. The sooner the better.
Well,
And
yeah,
also,
contact your vet because they can put a puzzle together for you, especially if other
right.
people are calling about the same issue.
Yep, that's right. Good point. Perfect. Okay, one last perspective, Nathan. Can you explain how you kind of put all of this together when you are looking at a job and assessing, doing it like a nutritional assessment of a job, and how you incorporate that assessment into a bid for the job?
So we're trying to match um, our animals up with the goal of the property owner. And so it really depends on the timing or what I'm trying to look at. What is going to be the feed quality of the feed that's on there when I get there? And so I will try to put different classes of animals depending on their needs on on jobs. So if it's a low quality job or low quality feed on a job, I'm not going to want to put lactating animals on it. I'm not going to want to put feeder goats on it. I'll probably put something that's dry or that's in being bred or has already been bred and is in the second gestation period. Something that's not going to require high nutritional value. And then if if I need to supplement, that's part of the bid. So I have to figure out, okay, this group of animals I'm going to put on this job, it has poor quality feed. They can eat X amount of acres a day. They're going to be here for X amount of days to complete the job. And this is where a test would come in to actually see where you're at, or you can take a guess. But then you have to do some calculations on how many pounds of feed that they're going to need or protein that they're going to need, and you can estimate how much money you're going to spend on the supplements, and you can put that into your bid.
So when you are doing that assessment and you're like calculating protein, are you have you done this long enough to where you can kind of just figure that out in your head, or are you getting down pen and paper and
I
trying to figure
still
that out?
Yeah, I still do pen and paper because some of the supplements we use, you don't want to go over a certain percentage of their total
Mhm.
diet
Okay.
because you'll screw up their gut. And but we're trying to hit, depending on what their needs are, we're trying to meet that demand
Yeah.
uh, of the percentage. So if they need, like the dry use, they need 8% to maintain. But if late in the season, if we're only at 6 or 7%, we only need to hit 2%. But depending on where they are in their dry cycle, are they going to go get bred? Do we need to, so we may adjust it up a little higher
Yeah.
and do the math that way. And we might use three different types of supplement and mix it um, to get what we need.
Perfect. And on that note, I wanted to go over some of these resources, and you'll get these slides. We'll get them sent out to you guys. Just some of the resources, the body condition scoring of sheep, sheep nutrition. This was the homework publication. Nutrient requirements of small ruminants. This is by the National Academy of Sciences. This is what someone would use if they're mixing rations, and it has lots of feeding tables in it to understand what the requirements are of the animal, and also has some feed the values, the quality values of different feeds. This is a more simplified version, nutrient requirements of sheep, which is another Oregon State University publication that has some of the it'd be easier, probably easier to understand than this small or nutrition requirements of small ruminants. So those are some publications that you can use. And I know we are right at 7:30, and I want to thank all of you and also Rosie and Julie for handling the questions. I've been peeking at the chat, and you guys done a great job of handling those questions. And also thank Nathan for all the taking the time uh, to do this and providing your valuable experience and input on this. Very helpful. And thinking ahead to the field day we'll have at UC Davis, think of your nutrition situation and maybe changes in your nutrition situation and questions that you want to ask about that when we get to the field day. And I'm happy to stick around, answer some more questions. I think Nathan was available too for a bit. So if you won't need to sign off, please do, and we'll see you in the future. Um, just taking a look at Laura's question when talking about free choice minerals, is it recommended that they all are always available? Nathan, do you want to
Yeah, so we
hit that
try to
one?
leave mineral out as long as it's not getting wrecked by the rain. But yeah, we leave it out as much as we possibly can.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. There's a fi there's a financial question behind that too, is, at what if you're spending a ton of money on minerals, but I guess what you're saying is as long as they're not getting ruined, like it's raining or um, they're pooping and peeing in it or whatever. So, okay, thank
So
you.
yeah, the other part of that is if you're harvesting an animal ever, you can send in, I believe, liver samples and get your animal tested to see where you are with your minerals, because
Mhm.
maybe they are hogging it in and you will go broke.
Thank you. Yeah, they seem to go through it really, really fast. So that sounds like a great idea. Thank you.
You
So
can
yeah, you
also
can,
add more salt to it,
right.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
Yep. That'll
dilute.
limit their intake.
Yeah.
Ah.
There are also mineral boluses that are available now in the US. I'll have to find what they're called, but they are helpful in some environments, like folks on the coast where it's really there's a lot of salt in the air, and like Nathan just said, most of our minerals are salt limiting, so which is supposed to limit how much they take in. All that data is based on cattle intakes. So for sheep and goats, we do observe that they eat more mineral than we really want them to. But in environments where it's really salty, they don't eat enough mineral because they already have enough salt kind of on their forage already. So there are some boluses. I'm working with a producer up north that's trying them, and we're doing some blood tests to see if it does sustain their mineral requirement for like 6 months at a time. So once we know more about that, I'll be more confident in like recommending their use. Yeah.
Gotcha. All right, perfect. Thanks, you guys.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Good job, guys.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your night. Enjoy your dinner. Nathan, thank you so much.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.